How many have recognized that song that was just lastly played by Louise Ammons? Danny Boy. That was one of Burkett's favorites. I'd just like to ask you if you have your cell phones on or your communication devices, if you want to make sure to check that so that there is no sound, I would appreciate that. On behalf of the Burkett C. McInturff family, I want to thank you for being here to honor a Kingsport icon, a true symbol of a man dedicated to his profession from beginning to end. I imagine that this memorial service is going to be a little bit different than what you might come and hear as a sermon typically in a church, because I've noticed through the years, as I've gone to funerals of other attorneys, even going back to when my father died a number of years ago, those wakes and the times when the lawyers are all together, they're different. They're telling stories, they're laughing, they're enjoying themselves, they're remembering things and telling wonderful tales about the attorneys and maybe about even each other. So today, we're not going to have a religious sermon. I'm not going to scare hell out of you or heaven into you, so you can just kind of relax. I hope that you will enjoy some of the stories that I plan to tell, and when I get through, I'm going to invite anybody that would like to come up and tell some story that you have that's unique with Burkett, just a few minutes at a time, and that would be very much appreciated, I think, by the family. Burkett and my relationship goes back a long while, but I have to tell you that it had a rather rocky beginning. The firm that I was working for represented the banking and trust out at the Fall Branch. It's been merged with Tennessee Bank, but it's no longer there. And they had asked me if I would file a lawsuit against this lady who had given a bad check, and the bank ultimately had to pay the check. It was not a large check, $150, so I filed it in the General Sessions Court. And Burkett was her attorney. So we set it for the hearing, and the day came for the hearing. And so I was going out there. I got there about 15 minutes before the trial was set. And Burkett was coming out the door at the old Sevier Avenue courthouse where the General Sessions Court was. And I went over to him and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, I just got that case that we had set moved to another day." And I said, "You did?" And I said, "Without me being there?" And he said, "Well, yes." And I stuck my finger in his face and I said, "Don't you ever do that to me again." Now, I knew there would be ramifications from that. And I just, it's kind of like the shoe ready to drop. You didn't know when the next one was going to fall, but I knew it would come eventually. 3 years later, I got a call from the criminal court, and I had been appointed along with Burkett McInturff to represent Freddie Bowen. You may remember the Freddie Bowen case in 1970. I hadn't been practicing very long. Back when I was representing the bank, I was half Burkett's age. I'm no longer half Burkett's age, but so I found out that he was going to be the attorney on the same side with me. We're going to represent Freddie Bowen. He was charged with raping and murdering and burying in a shallow grave the necessary girl, 13 years old. Well, I didn't look forward to that because of even the kind of case it was. I was not a criminal lawyer. I had done some criminal practice, as all young lawyers do, but I wasn't very good at it. So I looked forward, though, to working with Burkett, but I didn't know what might happen. Well, I guess we spent probably a total of, if you added all the days that we spent together, it was at least 6 weeks. And then we had a 5-day trial. And, of course, the conviction came in. And it was murder. It was a murder case, a capital case, and the jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death. That's tough for a guy that's only been out in practice for maybe 5 years to be able to take that kind of experience. But we did, and we filed an appeal, and it was interesting. We filed the appeal, and our only real chance of winning was that we charged that the way that Tennessee does the death penalty was cruel and inhuman treatment and was unconstitutional. So we went up on appeal, and while it was on appeal, the Supreme Court of the United States held, guess what? The way Tennessee and other states handled the death penalty was cruel and inhuman treatment and unconstitutional. Within a few days, the governor of Tennessee at that time commuted the sentence to 99 years for Freddie Bowen. He died, I believe, just a few years ago at age 61 in prison. Now, there have been a lot of people tell me some stories here, and even when they found out that I was going to be handling the eulogy. And they're great stories, and I've incorporated some of those. I was up in court yesterday, and the assistant clerk and master up there, Mary Masters, told me a story. She said Burkett would always come in after he got a case and the court signed the order, and he'd throw that order out on the clerk's desk, and he'd say, "Give me 2 certified copies." And when he'd come over, and she'd have them all ready, and she'd hand them to him, he'd say, "Now fee me." He meant give me an invoice. Well, she said, "No, Mr. McInturff, we're not going to charge you for these copies." And he said, handed out a $5 bill and threw it on her desk and said, "Put that in your liquor fund." Well, it's interesting to me that he would say, "Put that in your liquor fund," because in 1967, he swore off alcohol. And to my knowledge, he never took another drink. Now, you have to understand something about him swearing off of alcohol. He didn't go to a doctor. He didn't get shots. He didn't take anything. He didn't go to, well, he went to AA eventually, but he did it on his own because he was the most determined man I have ever known. Would I have an amen on that, at least in church? All right. Well, it wasn't too many years, I guess, after that. I'm not sure exactly when it was, but he told me, he said, "I'm going to quit smoking." I said, "Oh, okay, that's great." He did it again. He did not have a patch to put on. He didn't take anything. He didn't take any nicotine supplements. He just quit smoking. And it wasn't maybe a couple of years ago, he said to me, "I'm going to quit cursing." Well, 2 out of 3 isn't bad. He told me several times, as he did probably you, any stories that he ever told, he told them many times, but I enjoyed them every time because he enjoyed them so much. He would laugh at his own jokes that he just couldn't get through it. But he told me that he was going to, he knew he was going to die one day, but I figured he would die much after I died because I thought he was going to live forever. But he said, getting old is like walking through a minefield with your fellow soldiers. One gets picked off over here, one gets picked off over there, one over here, until you're the last man standing. He almost was the last man standing. In light of Burkett's more recent bouts with illness and broken hips, and most people don't survive 1 broken hip, many don't ever survive 2, but he was pretty good at having broken hips and being able to survive. He was in the hospital, and many of us didn't think that he was going to make it. But while he was there, I went over to see him. He was in a step-down unit, and so I was able to go see him and talk to him. And as a lot of times late in his life, he started talking about religion. And he did that day. And so I said to him, "Burkett, may I ask you a couple of questions?" He said, "Sure." I said, "Do you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God?" Without hesitation, in a firm voice, he said, "Yes, I do." I said, "Well, let me ask you this. Do you accept him as your Lord and Savior?" Again, "Yes, I do." Now, he told me later that he was going to go down to Meigs County and he was going to get a holiness preacher to baptize him. Now, I don't know if he did, but I do know that under the grace of God, I expect to see him one day. Another time I had a case with him, and I was driving him. I did not let him drive me. Well, you've seen his car, haven't you? Oh, man. I was driving him back from Rogersville. We'd had some depositions down there, and I was helping him with the case. And he got uncharacteristically quiet because most of the time he'd talk the whole time down and back, and he got quiet. And he then said to me, "Let me ask you a question." I said, "Sure, go ahead." He said, "What do you think heaven's going to be like?" And I said, "Well, I'm not real sure. What do you think, Burkett?" He said, "Well, do you think that we're just going to be sitting around on clouds all day singing songs?" I said, No, I think you'll have many opportunities to tell some of your great stories." Well, he seemed pretty proud of that I would acknowledge that. It reminds me of a story that I heard, it's a joke, that the last survivor of the Jamestown flood died and went to heaven. And of course, St. Peter's there at the gate to meet him. And the fellow was let in without any question. And the fellow said to him, I want to have an opportunity sometime in the future to speak to everybody in heaven about my experience in surviving the Jamestown flood. And Peter said, "We'll get to that. We've got an eternity. We'll get to that." So later on, he kept bugging him, and finally Peter said, "Today's the day. You're going to get a chance to speak and tell about your experiences. But I have to warn you about something. Noah is in the audience." You've probably heard that joke. It's a great old joke, but it just kind of fits, I think, with Burkett. He's going to get an opportunity to tell his stories, and I'm looking forward to hearing some more of them again. Years ago, incidentally, for any of you who are members of this congregation, I'm not, but he did tell me one time that he came and spoke to one of your Sunday school classes. And he talked to that Sunday school class about crime. That's what they wanted to have him talk to them about. And so he talked to them about it, and he had someone ask him the question. And they said, "Do you think that will we ever be able to say that there is no more crime?" And Burkett said, "That's the last thing that any district attorney general or police officer would want." They'd be out of a job. Well, I didn't say to him, although I'd sure like to have said it, "I guess you'd feel the same way, wouldn't you?" Well, the UT football game was a favorite place for him to go, and you know that, and he would drive down there, and a lot of times later on in his life, he didn't drive very fast. But he would drive down there, and he drove down that day, and he was sitting up in the stands, and he noticed this highway patrolman come after the game had started, and he came and walked down next to the UT football team, and he stayed there and just watched the game the whole time. Well, the game was over, and Burkett left, and he was coming home, and this police highway patrol officer drove by him, probably going 85 miles an hour, and Burkett was probably going 60, but he went flying on by him. And Burkett then just sped up and pulled up right behind him and went right along with him, going 85 miles an hour. And so the officer pulled off the road at an exit, but didn't turn off, came back up the ramp and pulled in behind Burkett and pulled him over and came up to the window and said, "I need to see your driver's license." And he showed it to him. He said, "Mr. McInturff, you're speeding." He said, "You were too." He said, "Yeah, but I'm a highway patrolman. I have the right to." He said, "Did you have the right to be down there on the football field at UT?" And the officer said, "You be careful out there, Mr. McInturff." You see, Burkett could read people better than anybody I ever knew. And he knew that police officer was actually on duty and should have been out on the road, but he came in and used his uniform to come in and be able to watch that ball game. You and I wouldn't get away with that, but he did. After one of Burkett's surgeries, Ben Mallicoat, is Ben here? I don't think I saw him, but Ben Mallicoat asked me to introduce him to Burkett. And so I made arrangements. Burkett was recovering from one of his surgeries, and we went to the house where he was staying, and the lady was working to keep him alive, and she did a great job. And he told us about the very first case he ever tried. Now, this is a man that's, he's right at 90 years old, although we weren't real sure what age he was because he did like to lie about his age. But he was about 90 years old, and he told us every fact about that case. He told us the facts. He told us who the witnesses were. He told us what was everything about that case.